Hi. Thank you for attending today's reading. Let's begin. Watched a kid try to kill himself on the first day of first grade. 27 comments. Share. Save. Hide. Report. 99% upvoted. End of story. Next story. I jumped 19 feet from my window. This is my story. This is real and happened to me in December 31st. 2020. I am 17 and have dissociative identity disorder. In that day my toxic familiar environment was much worse than ever in many years. I just felt so hopeless and scared. I wanted to call the police but I couldn't. Well, that day I go to sleep and then my alter Harvey come up to take control. My dad sleeps in the living room. He gathered all my belongings and money and then he wrote a note, "The abuse is over now. I can live or I can die. Either way I will be free." Then he opened up the window and jumped. I lived in a third floor and fall standing. I broke my pelvis and right ankle. The next thing I remember is being in the ambulance. Was horrible. The reason why I cried was not by the pain but by the fact that I was in that situation. Stuck now and dependent of my parents more than ever. But the worst thing happened a few months later when I suffered from sepsis and an infection of my feet along with pneumonia. I was in total 57 days in the hospital. I know I am very lucky to be alive and that I can walk now. With pain using a cane. I will have my third surgery on October for fixing that. It has been really harsh in this time. If you want to know something just comment. Thanks. End of story. Next story. I think this is just a brilliant description originally posted by a friend. I can see it being a trilogy. What do you all think? 5 comments. Share. Save. Hide. Report. 94% upvoted. End of story. Next story. How I accidentally started a cult in my school. When I was in middle school I accidentally created a cult by drawing yes, no, greater than, and on a green and white Ducks brand baseball that I named Stanley. It started off with my friends fooling around with it and asking it stupid questions. Then they started asking it serious questions, looking for signs and reasons as to why Stanley was an accurate source of information. Then word about the talking ball spread and Stanley soon attracted about 20 to 30 people in the school. And at recess we would all gather around in a circle and ask it questions. It somehow got to the point where people started criticizing others based on what Stanley said and would even sometimes accuse people of mistreating the ball. A few times someone would state that Stanley would punish those who mistreated him, looking for injured kids in the nurse's office as a sign, later leading to accusation. One of my friends even tried convincing me that he should be the rightful owner of the ball because of how many questions he asked it. I think Stanley may have been stolen or something because the ball went missing one time when I went to school and I almost never lose my things. Since the ball went missing I turned it into a school legend, saying that whoever found Stanley would hold great power, stating that it was hidden somewhere in the school. Not sure how that rumor went as soon after I moved away. End of story. Next story. I had plastic surgery in Bulgaria at 7 years old and I cannot stress how insane it was. Hey everyone. Full disclosure. This long-ass story is 100% true. There are times when it gets pretty wild and you may think I'm embellishing for dramatic flair. But I promise everything I'm about to say actually happened. Also a TW for gore and injury. So it was 2005 and I was 7 years old. I'm from the UK and at that time, my parents didn't have a lot of money but they wanted to take my sister and I on holiday. They settled on Bulgaria. Because the place we were going had a decent beach and a serviceable hotel, but more importantly, it was a cheap packaged holiday. For the first 11 days it was a standard affair. We spent our time at the beach, wandering around the markets and at the hotel. I remember it was super hot on the last day of our holiday, as well as it coincidentally being my dad's birthday, 29th of August. My dad asked if we wanted to go on a bike ride. My mum wanted to relax on the beach instead. So my dad, sister and I hired this bike thing. I don't know the name for it, but it looked like the frame of a car, with 4 seats and a set of pedals beneath each seat so each person could pedal as much or as little as they want. Anyway, we were pedaling through the streets when suddenly my sandal fell off my foot below. And I instinctively reached down to scoop it up with my leg so we wouldn't have to stop. Big mistake. My leg got caught in the chain mechanism and the relentless cycling of the chain combined with the gears of the bicycle meant that a massive part of my leg was sliced open. I'm talking like my calf muscle was being held onto my leg by a strip of flesh. I immediately went into shock so I didn't feel any pain. But I'll remember the sensation of me gritting my teeth whilst the vehicle ground to a halt for the rest of my life. My dad looked at me and my leg and all the color drained from his face. He's a doctor, so at that point I knew I was basically fucked. He scooped me up and took me into a hotel we happened to have stopped outside of, and it had a medical room. As I lay down on the medical table and looked at the flesh that used to be my leg pump out blood, I was terrified. I was 7. My mum was still lounging around on the beach, so my sister, 10 years old, had to run half an hour in 35-degree heat to reach her. And when she eventually found her, she basically collapsed from heat exhaustion. My mum had not really understood the gravity of the situation, thinking I just needed a couple of stitches, so when she saw my leg she nearly fainted on the spot. This is when the comedy begins. I had to get taken to the hospital for them to properly examine my leg and an ambulance was called. I have no idea if the ambulance driver was new or if he liked to drink, but he was the absolute worst ambulance driver of all time. Let's call him Sergey. It took him ages to arrive. And when he got to the hotel, he immediately went for a piss. Meanwhile, my leg is basically hanging on by a thread. Then once we finally get moving again, he cannot find the hospital. Sergey was stopping the ambulance every 5 minutes to ask random people on the street if they knew the way to the hospital. The man whose literal only job is to take people to the hospital. He tells us in broken English, soon. We find soon. This continues for half an hour and eventually we arrive at the hospital. I was taken into a room with a classic large grey-haired babushka-esque woman who was cycling through her collection of dressing tools, which are clearly unclean. Like in the movies when combat medics have a selection of tools they unroll whilst they are in the field. It was that. Did I also mention that she was smoking a cigarette in the assessment room with me, a 7-year-old, in a hospital? Because she was. After a quick examination she calls for a surgeon who takes a look. He takes my dad aside and says that I need surgery urgently. My dad, also a doctor, agrees, but also he is not the biggest fan of the clinical environment. We have the NHS in the UK. And even if it's not great now, it was pretty serviceable in 2005. I was going to need a full skin graft using the skin that was left from the chunk of my calf that was still hanging on my essentially a 5 cm strip of flesh. Eventually the surgeon said to my father, "If you want what's best for your son, you will have the surgery here." So, my father agreed and I get taken into a room with a bed where I am to wait for my operation. It's not great. There are cockroaches as well as other bugs on the floor, and at the toilet there had clearly not been cleaned from the last occupant. I couldn't eat or drink water because of the surgery. But there was also no food court in the hospital. So my dad, sister and mum, who was sat with a jumper around her legs because her bare legs were not allowed, are pretty hungry after waiting 5 hours in the room. Eventually it's my turn for the operation, where I was wheeled to the theater on a commode. A portable toilet. Before placed on the table. There I was, a 7-year-old in a foreign country where nobody spoke much of my language. On an operating table after a horrific accident. It was scary, I won't lie. They take the shirt off my body and throw it to my mother. You go now, they say, and then inject me with the anesthetic and I go under. My mum is waiting the entire time outside the operating room. And eventually the doors open. I'm carried back to my room by the surgeon whilst a nurse holds the drip. I'm not sure if this is better or worse than the commode. I was meant to wake up an hour or so after my operation. But I actually wake up 5 minutes after it ends, 5 minutes before, and I would have woken up mid-surgery. Fuck that. It may have been to do with the anaesthetist giving me too little. Because I've woken up so early I was blind. I can't explain it, but my eyes were open and I literally could not see anything. I was totally conscious. Still woozy but compos mentis. And I just remember saying, "Mummy, I can't see anything." That was terrifying. Because of the language barrier we had no way to establish if I was allergic to the anesthetic, so worst case scenario was that I had reacted badly and I was now blind as a result. Eventually my vision returned and I looked down at my leg. The entire lower half is wrapped up. But I still had my leg, which was a total fucking miracle. My dad, now confident that the surgery is over and the side effects have subsided, pleads with the surgeon to discharge me so Wen can get back to the UK ASAP. The surgeon eventually relents because my dad is also a medical professional and calls for me to be taken back to the hotel. Guess who is taking me? It's only the legend Sergei. I still remember the look on my parents' face when he pulled up. It was actually comical. By this point it's 1 a.m. and we're in the back of the ambulance driving back to the hotel. Suddenly, the ambulance stops on a dimly lit street and the engine cuts off. At this point we're pretty sure we're about to get jumped. My dad looked out of the window and Sergei is on the side of the road and he's just pissing again. Seriously, this guy's bladder is non-existent. Eventually the ambulance rumbles and we're on our way again. We arrive back at the hotel. From this point things go relatively smoothly. My mum on a whim had taken out medical insurance for the holiday, so we were able to save a lot of money, and the holiday company we went out with moved our flights up. We even got promoted on Balkan Airways to a seat at the front, where we had to hold the trays in place to stop them from falling onto us at takeoff and landing. We land and I go to a hospital. We examine my leg, and when I tell you it looked grim, I seriously mean it. It looked like a slab of yellowing meat on a street stall. Punctured and unnatural. I won't tell you about the smell, but it wasn't great. They have never seen stitching like this before in their life. It seems to have defied all convention. But the skin graft is holding well, so they decide to not put me back into theater and see how it goes. That's basically the end of it. After months of physiotherapy and seriously bad bandage changing sessions, I was able to walk again. It might seem like I have painted a poor description of the Bulgarian medical services. But in truth I am more thankful to them than I can ever say. I wish I knew the name of the surgeon so I could tell him how thankful I am to him for saving my leg. Without him I would most likely be an amputee now. We were also foreigners in their country. Didn't speak any of the language and were completely clueless about pretty much anything, so the fact that despite all of this I was still able to get the care I got is truly amazing. I have never been back to Bulgaria. I have also ridden a bike twice in the last 16 years. You really don't forget how to ride a bike, by the way. That's legit. My leg is healed now, although I have a gnarly scar if anyone wants to see it. Every year on my dad's birthday, which he now shares with the date of this horrific accident, I always look back at it and still can't quite believe that it happened. If you've made it to the end, I'm super impressed. I just came across this sub and knew that I had the perfect story for it. I hope you've enjoyed hearing about my disaster holiday to Bulgaria. End of story. That is all for today. If you want to support my automated channel, feel free to drop a like and subscribe. See you tomorrow.